When we talk about architectural drawings, we usually would think about floor plans, elevations. Those are the conventions, or more of the orthographic view or multi view types of drawings for architectural drawing norms. So they're usually two dimensional. They have to be viewed one diagram at a time in order for you to get the idea of the architectural design. And then there's something like isometric drawing or parallel types of drawing. It a bit more 3D, but with a convention that is with parallel lines that is scaled. And then there is the third type of drawing, which is perspective drawing, which is something like this. Now, this is the usual thing that you would see in books in explaining the phenomenon of perspective drawings. What perspective drawing usually is? It's illustrating something three-dimensional on a two-dimensional format, but with foreshortening. Now, what do I mean by foreshortening? Well, if you take an object like this, let's say that this is just a cube. Now, we all know what a cube is. It has all its sides with the same measurement. Now, if we take that and place it and illustrate that in perspective, it would look something like this. Now, we know for a fact that each dimension of the cube is the same, but when we illustrate it in perspective, they're kind of different. Now, you see that this line, for example, is 3 meters, and this edge also is 3 meters. And that edge, so the X, Y, and Z's are in perspective drawing, they're kind of different when we're illustrating it. So when we look at this is angled, for example, this 3-meter dimension of a width or that side. And then the vertical is these are kind of different. So you can see one, two, and three verticals being drawn differently. The reason for that is that this is a phenomenon called foreshortening. So these verticals, for example, in different distances. So this edge is closer, so therefore it's being drawn much bigger than the rest, the two. So this example here is a 2-point perspective. Another example would be a 1-point perspective, which is something like this. What if you open the box and you see what's inside, and you're directly looking at this? Some of the things that we always illustrate when we're doing perspective drawing for architecture is the horizon line. The horizon line is a representation of where the sky meets the sea level. And of course, it's not a straight line in actuality. It's a curving line on the Earth's surface. But here we're illustrating and simplifying it. Since the Earth is very large, we perceive this horizon line as a straight line. So when we're standing on the surface, this is what we see. If this is us, what we're seeing beyond would be the tangent of where the Earth is curving and going to the other side. Of course, we cannot see that horizon line when we're living, say, an urban setting, and we usually don't find that. It's going to help us identifying or locating the vanishing point, which is the VP. So as I mentioned, there is a 1-point perspective. So here I'm showing you a plotted type of way of doing a perspective drawing, which has a picture plane, the floor plan of that, and how a 1-point perspective drawing is generated. Whereby if you're standing here on plan, which is the station point, and the picture plane is sort of like this imaginary type of plane that is where you see this perspective drawing being generated. And this is the illustration of this perspective view. Now, the 2-point perspective is something like this, whereby the if it's going to be plotted in drafting, it would be something like this. It has a picture plane, you have the station point, and by projecting these things. So when we're talking about freehand drawing in perspective, it would look something like this when we're trying to plot something. So this is a more freehand drawing. I'm using sort of a framework, a grid of some sorts, but this is for proposed designs or interior perspective designs. For exterior perspective drawings, it would look something like this for a framework of sorts. So I'll just explain a few concepts of what the horizon line is and what does it represent. So it's usually associated with your eye level. Okay, so this is an orthographic representation of this. If somebody with your same height or eye level would be standing in front of you, you would share the same horizon line. Of course, not all of us have the same exact eye level all the time. So basically, if this is you and this is how you would see that those other people with the same eye level, and the horizon line is going to be the same at their eye level. And then if it's shifted somehow, for example here, if you are on a higher plane and then the level of the person is about exactly one eye level height, and then therefore you would illustrate these people like so, two persons height from the horizon line. So here I'm ghost drawing that person, but it's double eye level. So these people are not the same eye level as you. Here I'm illustrating something that what if you are at the lower level than the people that you are observing, and therefore this is the view illustration of this because it's at your eye level would be one third of that person, and therefore the horizon line would be placed on one third of their vertical dimension. So in perspective, this is what you see. So here, this is an illustration of how we're doing it if we are trying to observe architecture or illustrations of the real world based on the eye level. Of course, there is the general type of perspective plotting, which is a 3-point or multi-point perspective drawing, but we're not going to go into that since there is a pandemic going on. Most probably, the safest way of doing a study for perspective drawing with freehand would to reference from a picture. So the goal of something like this, an exercise, is to identify learning about how to get proportions. So I have a hallway picture reference here. So I printed it out with an A4 size paper. So it's easier for you to replicate this on with drawing is to first frame the scene, the outline of it. Okay, I'm not going to be following what is printed on like this outline here, but rather I'm going to identify the frame on which I'm going to be using with a ratio of 3:4. So I've already measured this with a 3:4 ratio. So I'm outlining with the red mark so they could see. And I would like to identify where the midpoints of these edges. So I can identify where the middle center is. Now, so this is important because later on when we're going to replicate this on paper, you can easily identify where things are. So how would I identify the horizon line of this? Because it's important for us to identify it so that we could identify where the vanishing points are for this scene. Of course, you could take a ruler. First, identify, of course, the lines that are parallel to each other and can converge into a point. So here, these horizontal frames can do that. So I'm just going to red mark the lower frames, and then I'm going to use the upper frame as a way to converge and draw these straight lines. And there you can identify where the horizon line is. So I can now draw a straight line like so through those lines converging. So that's the vanishing point for these. Now, vanishing points only exist on horizon line. This plane has a certain vanishing point, which is that. These planes, however, are different from this plane, and they would converge into a different vanishing point. Let's try to identify that. Okay, I'm going to take the lower frames, align them with my ruler, and project. So they converge into a certain vanishing point, which is different from this set of window frames. So it's the same for everything here. These two sets of frames are the most identifiable for these. And also the columns would have a vanishing point. So if we take along the lowest part of these columns, they would be projected here. And if we take the highest points of these columns, they would be there. By the way, I got the ratio of these by measuring 24 centimeters here, 18 centimeters for this. So these are 3:4. Furthermore, you can you can draw out the grid for the midpoint grids of the frame. Now, remember, this exercise is meant for simulate what if you are drawing with a view frame on site. So since we can't do that, we're going to do the same thing here. This is the closest thing that you could do than in person right now. So I'm going to be drawing this by first identifying where my frames are. I'm using a point system to identify where things are. So I'm drawing this in freehand rather than using the ruler. Of course, this is good practice. Every drawing, of course, is a chance for you to really finally nail freehand drawing without the need for rulers. I will be identifying where my horizon line is, so I could probably can check where these vanishing points are later on. A good trick here is to first do the outline as per quadrant. How do you do that? So here I'm referring to this quadrant first. Identify where the edges are. That ceiling line is doing something like here. Now it's best to first start with ghost lining or light lines. I'm looking at this as by way of proportions. For example, this is about halfway here. So I'm going to draw a line to identify that. Then halfway on this grid, it's going to be the top of the door. Then this line of the door would be somewhere there, already spilling onto this second quadrant. It's going to be the lowest point of the door is going to be there. So it's just identifying first the shapes of and points of where these are. Okay, so this is my horizon line. This point of this angle is going to be somewhere here. So I'm going to draw that. Of course, it's not perfect. The objective of this exercise is not a 100% accuracy, or else what you need to do is just trace it. It's a practice of looking at proportions and angles. Here on this, somewhere there, the angle of this is angling going like this for this wall. This shape of this upper window, the angle for this one is with this lower part is doing like that, and there would be that window frames. This quadrant has the most lines. First identify where your midpoint, again example here, there, that's my midpoint. My midpoint here is middle center here is this. So I'm going to relate this. So the one of the frames is going to be here, and then the other frames are going to be, okay, this column is somewhere there. So I'm aligning what's already existing here. So I drew this lower part, that middle center of this quadrant is here. So this is just a demonstration of how I started doing all of the sketching this. Of course, I'm going to be showing you the rest and how I did it, 2 years ago. Now you can do this with any picture reference. And of course, you can check by identifying where the vanishing points are. For example, this one, I can check the projection or the angles of this going to a single point for these frames here, and I can identify the vanishing point for these frames right over here by projecting those to a vanishing point. So once you finish with the ghost lining, you could now do probably, then later on, of course, the final drawing of this. That's it for this video. Happy drawing.